Hello everybody, welcome to this video presentation. My name is Brad Hurst. I want to take some time here to explain some concepts with regard to the cosmological calendar and how it works. But before we do that, I want to thank Brian Cole for sending me a microphone to be able to do these things. I didn't plan on doing this today, but I'm actually homesick, and so I thought I'd try to wrap this up and get this done. The purpose of doing this video series, not only just this one, but the ones that we've done in the past, is sort of twofold. First of all, it is to inform the believer. That's pretty simple. Second of all, it is to encourage the believer and to motivate the believer unto a standard and lifestyle of righteousness and holiness. We see in Hebrews where it asks the question, it says, well, if we see the day approaching, okay, what are we to do? We're to provoke each other unto love and to good works. When we look in the book of Peter, 1 Peter I believe it is, we are asked a question. It says, knowing that all these things shall be dissolved in this manner, what manner of person ought we to be in all holiness and conversation, looking for and hastening unto the day of the Lord? So if you're looking at these videos and you're just getting a sense of, wow, gee, that's neat, you're kind of just wasting your time. If they're not calling you to a standard of holiness, it's really just a waste of time. You need to sit down and ask what it is, first of all, that God is showing us and what we are to do. What are we to do in our churches? What are we to do in our homes? What are we to do at our work? What are we to do in our neighborhoods? That's the question we need to be asking ourselves. What do we see in Revelation chapter 3, verse 4? It says that the Lord says that you have even those in Sardis, even in Sardis, you have those who have not stained their garments, and they shall walk with me in white, for they are worthy. What did Jesus ask us to do? He asked us to watch and to pray that we might be counted worthy to escape all of these things. Watching and praying. Watching isn't just sitting around looking at videos. Watching involves also tailoring our lives after the manner of Christ in a way that is prescribed by Christ. As people come to us, confront us in our sin, call things out, and as we adjust ourselves as we see the day approaching. With that in mind, let's go forward. And we're going to notice a few things here. When we talk about our structure of the cosmos, we're going to start with the very basics of this issue. Talk about the 24-hour day. It starts in the morning, goes to midday, goes to evening, and to midnight. Now there are different cultures that started in the evening. Some people like us, we started at midnight. But you understand that there's a rotation that kind of goes in a clockwise fashion here. Again, 4 parts. This is the lunar month. Starting at the new horn, the waxing crown of a quarter moon, the crown what's called the full, and the dark moon. Again, going clockwise. We have the year. Again, starting at spring equinox, clockwise up to summer solstice, the fall equinox, and then to the winter solstice. By the way, if you hear me clear my throat or cough, it's because I'm homesick doing this work today. So, then we have what's called the great year, the precessional cycle. It's about 26,000 years long. Now that conflicts with our biblical worldview, and we'll talk about that here a little bit later. But essentially, this precessional cycle supposedly starts here at this point here, goes 6,500 years to this point, then we get to this point, to this point, and to this point. Concept of gold, silver, bronze, and iron. It's very important to understand. We're going to see the biblical usage of that here a little bit later. The ancients understood the division of the great year, the precessional cycle, and divided it into 4 parts of about 6,500 years apiece, depicted by 4 metals. This concept of the breakup into 4 metals goes all the way back to the very early Babylonian and Elamite period of about 2300 BC. Many early civilizations recognized the division, and they all, in one way or another, understood it to depict the decline of humanity over time. However, the way that was presented varied. The very early Elamite Persians saw a tree that depicted the ages of the earth. Hesiod of Greece, right around 750 to 650 BC, saw it as only the ages of men. The first age was gold, which was the age of the gods, who existed in innocence without toil and trouble. However, the Greeks believed that they were descended from the gods and thus escaped the corruptions of men. As a result, they inserted a fifth age between the bronze and the iron, calling it the age of the heroes. Hellenism, that is Greek thinking, was very prevalent in the New Testament period. The Bible speaks directly against it. If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. 1 John 1, 8 and 10. If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. If we say that we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us. Sorry, it looks like I repeated it, but that's just the way it goes. We're just going to leave it. In 43 BC through 18 AD, a Roman poet by the name of Ovid dropped the age of the heroes and developed the thought about the age of iron. People are divided, according to him, this is what it would be like. People are divided by boundaries and nations begin to develop. It is said that this is a time when malignant great evil will prevail, where people became corrupt and selfish. Modesty, truth, and faith are gone, replaced by deceits, frauds, violence, and lust for personal gain. The path of an individual human being became unknown and without any true purpose. Even the relations within a family became fragile or worse. It is the time of great mistrust between human beings. The earth itself is no longer intact. Wealth is being dug up from the earth by human beings who are overcome by greed and stockpiled for personal gain. Gold and iron, in particular, that is, the seeds for envy and hate and consequently war are planted. Men are born with gray hair, which I think is actually an idiom for being born dead, might be a reference to abortion. There is no help for humankind anymore. And if I might continue, they thought that unless the gods intervened, all flesh would perish. All of the above have elements of truth in them, but they all have inherent conflicts in them and assume a longer time frame of 26,000 years than our biblical worldview can allow. In other words, they got too much time. However, we are not left to our own devices. The divisions do tell us about the ages of men, but not in the way that the ancients proposed it. Around 600 BC, a king, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, had a dream. A 17-year-old young man, Daniel, explained it to him. See Daniel 2. According to Daniel 1, Daniel and his companions were very gifted in science. They were educated in all the wisdom and the knowledge of Babylon and excelled above all. It seems as though he knew, or they knew, a lot about the cosmos / the stars. The God of heaven gave Daniel the insight, who told it to the king. The dream was of a statue of a man, not as a tree, as in Persia. It had 4 metals, gold, silver, bronze, and iron. No reference to the age of the heroes. The metals of the image do not represent cosmological ages, but rather empires of men. These empires, that is, they decline in value and purity, but increase in strength. The last empire, iron, is broke up into nations, with the corruptions of clay being inserted into the iron for nations of weakness and strength. Imagine the utter shock of everyone present. The astrologers, the magi, the king. Not only did Daniel tell the king's dream, he explained one of the most enigmatic mysteries of the cosmos. Babylon, gold. Medo-Persia, silver. Greco-Roman, bronze. Islam, Sunni or Ottoman / Shia, Iran, Safavid, the iron, divided into 10 nations at the end of World War I. While some may disagree with the explanation of the empires, it is without question that one of the greatest prophecies of the Bible was premised on an understanding of the astronomical cosmological order. The 4 parts of the great year are not 4 ages. They are 4 successive empires of men. Heliacal rising. The heliacal rising of a star occurs annually when it first becomes visible above the eastern horizon for a brief moment just before sunrise, after a period of time when it has not been visible. You can see this right on Wikipedia. Not all stars have heliacal risings because some stars remain above the horizon all the time. A good example would be the North Pole or Polaris. Only certain stars rise and flash into existence in the pre-dawn glow of the horizon. Because these heliacal risings are so specific, just one day that is, they were used by many different ancient civilizations to mark events such as the drought season and the planting time. Stanford University told me this. Here's kind of like a chart here. We see the horizon, we got the sun, we got the date 3550 BC, it's July 9th. Got the constellation Orion. We have Sirius right here at heliacal rising. Just before sundown or sunrise, it's coming over the horizon. We have a little tiny star right here. It's called Anus, which means a sword. Okay. The one just below it called Hadassah, which means a shining sword. This right here is the sword of Orion. Here's Sirius right here. In 3550 BC, at the Giza complex, the angle from Sirius to the sword, that is the sword of Orion, was 51.4 degrees. The same exact angle of the Great Pyramid. Both Sirius and the sword would have rose up the pyramid toward the east. So in other words, if you're standing looking at the pyramid, okay, at this point in time, we have east is further north here because of the precession of the equinoxes. Okay, so if you're actually standing and looking at the pyramid and you're looking at it sort of kind of like you're looking from the northwest, or I think it's the southwest position, you would actually see Sirius rise right up this angle right here. You would also see the sword rise up right through and right up through this angle right here, okay, at 51.4 degrees. By 3000 BC, Orion had moved by 5 degrees. By the way, that's the result of precession of the equinoxes, part of the great year. It had moved by 5 degrees as it was rotating counterclockwise. That is, Orion is rotating in this direction, I believe it is. Okay? However, Cyrus was in a calendar position that it would remain in for 3,000 years, resetting its position to heliacal rising on July 20th every 4 years. It seemed to defy the precession of the equinoxes, which were supposedly controlled by Marduk. This became the foundation of the solar calendar as its leap year. By the way, if you don't understand what I'm talking about with regard to Marduk, go back and watch the video series that I just did on ancient astronomy. All right, so what we're basically saying is we're talking about the calendar year. That literally means that even though Sirius is moving along the horizon with regard to the equinox, what is supposed to happen as it moves along the horizon, it's supposed to move forward in the calendar. And it wasn't doing that. It was moving along the horizon, but it wasn't moving forward in the calendar. It kept resetting itself every 4 years back to July 20th. In fact, it was that action that became the foundation for the solar calendar and its leap year. I'm going to kind of repeat this a little bit here. The reason for the constant position of heliacal rising on 720 is because we are in a double binary system. Our star had a binary companion. Our star has, I should have said, a binary companion that seems to have gone dark. All right? It is highly probable that this is Nibiru, and it was seen back in 1586 BC. Sirius also has a binary companion. In essence, we are part of a double binary system. From 3000 BC until 5 AD, the Sun and Sirius were expanding their distance until max distance was reached in about 5 AD. Then they began to switch positions, and thus Sirius began to move on the calendar as our distances started to close. Kind of like a diagram right here, okay? This is our Sun right here, okay? And this is the Sun's orbit over a 26,000 year period as it's going through its precessional cycle. And what happens here is we have the Sun here in 2012 BC. It's here at 5 AD, and it's here in 2012 AD. This is Sirius. You notice this orbit's a little bit smaller, okay? But it's just Sirius in 2012 BC, and you can see as you come across here, that's not quite facing directly at this point in time. But because the distances are so far, the span or the movement is not calculable by the naked eye. It's just not calculable. And so you can see it moves through here at 5 AD, and you can see right through here that they're both facing each other. And then you get to this point right here, and this is 2012 AD. And as a result, the further it gets out across this way, the more it's going to move, the quicker it's going to move as it's moving this way and as we're moving this way. But from here to here, actually what would probably be right about from here to here, okay, at this point in time, when we're over here and moving into here, the angles would have been almost imperceivable from a calendar set date. And so what ends up happening is every 4 years, even though there is some movement because of the elliptical nature of what we got here, every 4 years the star would reposition itself on the calendar on July 20th until it got to this point right here. Then they began to switch positions, and then it began to move. It began to move on from July 20th there on. So, in other words, its heliacal rising point, it was no longer there. But how did Sirius come to be associated with Marduk? Because we already talked about Marduk recently. The connection was through Tammuz. According to the Babylonian pantheon of gods, Tammuz was known as the fifth king of the pre-flood world. He was known as Dumuzi and was one of the Anakim, from which we get the word Anak. After the death of Apsu, Tammuz was the lover of Ilana, the transgender Tiamat. Again, go back and see our video series. Upon Ilana's death and consignment to the underworld, Tammuz descended there to secure her release by offering himself as substitute. He was seized upon by the Anunnaki, who were consigned there as a result of Marduk killing Tiamat. Ilana was freed and given her place in the heavens. Her place we know as Sirius. The month of Tammuz was named for the time of weeping for Tammuz, and that occurred on July 20th. As long as Sirius / Tiamat defied the precession of the equinoxes and kept finding its way back to the heliacal rising of July 20th, it was thought that paganism and all the vices involved would continue. Remember, Tiamat was the god of paganism and vice in the ancient world. On a side note, as mentioned in a previous video, Marduk controlled the Nibiru, that is the crossings, of both the ecliptic and equatorial lines. Sirius, Tiamat, was given a place that was in the waters below and too far south for any eclipse to occur near it. Hence, Tiamat would never ascend to the sides of the north or in the head of the dragon. Again, see the video series. The festival for the weeping of Tammuz was practiced by taking idols from all over the known world to the temple of Tammuz in Mesopotamia and facing them in a position of submission, either around the image of Tammuz or toward the rising sun. The alternate seemed to be to temporarily convert a local temple into a shrine where the above said idols could be taken instead. Keep in mind that this took place on July 20th of the solar year. The shift from the lunar year to the solar year meant that it was not possible to observe the Sabbath. The Jews made the conversion during the Assyrian period. Now consider the following, Ezekiel 8. Then said he unto me, Son of man, hast thou seen what the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark, every man in the chambers of his imagery? For they say, the Lord sees us not. The Lord has forsaken the earth. He also said unto me, Turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations that they do. Then he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Then said he unto me, Hast thou seen this, O son of man? Turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations than these. And he brought me into the inner court of the house of the Lord, or the Lord's house. And behold, at the door of the temple, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs toward the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east. And they worshipped the sun toward the east. Virgil, 70 BC through 19 BC. Around 40 BC, Virgil, the Roman poet, noted that the cosmos was about to enter a new constellation age. Go back and look at the last video in our video series, and you'll understand this a little bit better. The equinox had left Aries, that is the ram, at around 400 BC, and it was about to enter Pisces and remained there for a little more than 2,000 years. By the way, 400 BC was the last New Testament book. That's from 400 BC to about until the New Testament period. That's considered the silent years. Each time the equinox entered a new constellation, it was called a new heavens and a new earth. Virgil declared the coming of the Virgin, the fall of the serpent, the birth of the God-child, and the arrival of the heavenly race. My question I have is how did he know this? I'm assuming that he probably knew the Hebrew Scriptures. However, this change would not go unannounced. He said a triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn would occur in Pisces as the transition into Pisces was about to begin. If we use stellarium, it occurs in 6 BC. If we use starry night, it occurs in 5 BC, due to the latter not using the year 0. Some people, basically, on a side note, some people say that the transition actually took place right around 1 BC, and the transition took about 71 years to complete, and so it wasn't until right around 70 AD that we see that the old age had closed out and the new age had begun. Gee, I wonder what happened in 70 AD that might mark that on a geopolitical scale. Back to our passage. This announcement was so spectacular that it, along with additional conjunctions and the new age, created an atmosphere of prophetic expectation. See the video entitled, The Star Has Reappeared. By the way, they would have been looking at Daniel's prophecy of Daniel's 70 weeks, the 69 years and 69 weeks and so forth, and they would have been looking at the astronomy. They wouldn't have been looking at beehives, or they wouldn't have been looking at butterflies, or they wouldn't have been looking at, other things that the Bible did not tell them to look at. If the Bible didn't specifically tell them to look at those things, or specifically direct them to those things, they didn't look at those things. They were looking at essentially the stars and probably the weeks of years, as we see in Daniel chapter 9. Tiberius, 14 BC through 37 AD. Tiberius became Caesar in 14 AD. By the time he was born, Platonic thought had begun to ruin the mythic language of myth of the cosmos. Side note, Plato did a lot of damage to the foundations of science and to the foundations of the language of myth as we find in astronomy. Again, go back and look at the video series. The result was that truth was not possible. Absurdities were as valid as non-absurdities, and the foundations of science began to erode. However, somehow, Tiberius became educated in the language of myth and appears to understand its implications. In the 19th year of Tiberius, a very disconcerting astronomical event was noted. A ship navigator by the name of Thamos noticed something peculiar as he performed his task. Keep in mind they would have navigated by the stars. On July 20th, the star Sirius, whom the Greeks called Pan for pantheism, was not in place. In other words, it was not at heliacal rising. It was not at heliacal rising at all. He told the ship's captain, who told him to make the announcements to the crowds on the shore. The great Pan is dead. The implication, or the implications, were tremendous. From an astronomical perspective, Tiamat, that is, Pan, was descending in the lower parts of the earth. People began to fret and panic. In fact, the word panic comes from this event. By the time the ship arrived at the next port, Tiberius had issued a summons for Thamos to appear. After an inquiry, Tiberius declared that the great Pan was dead. The implications were dreadful to all. Not only was it understood to be not only was it understood to be a fatal blow to paganism, there was widespread fear that the Iron Age would come. This, coupled together with Virgil's, that's supposed to be Virgil, not Vigil, with Virgil's prediction of the coming of the heavenly race, put Tiberius into a fit of depression. The 19th year of Tiberius was 33 AD. 4 months prior to the crucifixion, the crucifixion had occurred and was marked by a lunar eclipse over Babylon on 4/3/33 AD. By the way, that's the only lunar eclipse that can account for what Peter says in Acts chapter 2, that there was a blood moon. I don't understand why people keep going to other dates. Okay? No other date has a lunar eclipse. No other proposed date has a lunar eclipse proposed. None whatsoever. Jesus had offered himself as substitute, descended into the lower parts of the earth to set his bride or the captives free. While there, he made a proclamation in the midst of the spirits who sinned in the days of Noah, or these are the Enochs. And they ascend, and then he, that is Christ, ascended on high, placing us, that is his bride, in the heavenlies on the sides of the north. Do you hear that story? Do you hear that story? Did we just hear that just a few slides ago? Something similar to that? That was kind of a failure? The heavenly race, remember the heavenly race that Virgil spoke of? The heavenly race that is seated in the heavens and has its citizenship in heaven began to walk among men, declaring the kingdom. No wonder the known world wanted to kill them off. Christianity demonstrated to them the collapse, the death of Tiamat, or the death of the great Pan, and the era of paganism was about to end, or was going to start the process of ending. Okay? The entire world, with its temples and everything, and tributes and so forth, had an economic system wrapped around paganism. And now, all of a sudden, something happens, and the very people that they said would actually show up, that would actually kind of start signaling that, began to show up. So the only option is to kill them off, to try to delay it or to keep it from happening. Look at what we see here in Ephesians 4. Compare this with the idea of Tammuz going into the lower parts of the earth to rescue his wife, and him being caught behind and being left there, and people weeping for him, and Sirius being put into a position where she's still in a subordinate position, or not Sirius, but Tiamat being put into a subordinate position, being given a star in the lower parts of the earth, or in the lower parts of the heavens. Just consider this, okay? Ephesians 4:8. Wherefore he says, he who ascended on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts unto men. Okay? Now he that ascended, what is it? But he also descended first into the lower parts of the earth. He that descended is the same that also ascended far above all heavens, that he might fill all things. This is a mockery of the devil's system in Tammuz. Tammuz went in there to free his wife, and he got trapped, and he can't get out. And then even then his wife really didn't get a prestigious position, and now she's in the process of starting to be basically falling back into the lower parts of the earth according to the way they understood things. This is the world thinking of the day. 1 Peter 3:18, for Christ also hath once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust. In other words, he was our substitute. Remember, Tammuz came in there to substitute himself for the wife, but he can't free himself. Okay? The just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit. Okay? By which also he went and preached unto the spirits in prison. I'm assuming these are the same spirits that are referred to back in the Babylonian epic, which sometimes were disobedient when once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah while the ark was preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water. Notice how it seems to indicate that his death and resurrection enabled him to go and confront the spirits in prison. It is absurd to think that the Bible did not present itself in the worldview thinking of the day. These ideas about Tiamat and Tammuz and the Babylonian epic and things like that, all were still present and exercised in different forms throughout the known world at the time. And along comes the Lord, and he says, you know what? Tell you, I'm going to do you one better. Okay? The lower parts of the earth, which I think is a reference to Sheol or to hell, okay? Those are real places. And there were real spirits that sinned in the days of Noah, and I believe that those are the Anakim, or better known as the Nephilim. Okay? But those characters were deified in such a way, and they made up some cacophony story about themselves that the Lord is taking and using against them. I think it's absolutely funny to see how the Lord mocks his enemies with their own hubris. Notice how it seems to indicate that the death and resurrection enabled Christ to confront the spirits in prison. I can't emphasize that enough. That's why I brought it up twice. But look at these Bible passages, okay? Remember Tiamat? Sirius? She's consigned to the lower parts, the lower waters, okay? Into the area of the dragon tail. She's never able to rise above that. Look at this. Beautiful for situation. The joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north. These are the northern parts. The city of the great king. Isaiah 14:13. For thou hast said in thy heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. Ephesians 2:8-6. And he has raised us up together and made us to sit in heavenly places with Christ Jesus. Christ Jesus ascended, if you look at the rest of the passage in Ephesians, Christ Jesus ascended far above the heavenlies. Okay? He has an exalted throne in the highest places. And we're sitting there with him. Look at the contrast that they give here. Well, that's the end of our video. All right. I know it's kind of wrong. It's not very professionally done or anything. But the point that I wanted to state is this: is that it was very clear that there was an understanding of the cosmos among the general population, and it is very clear that there was a worldview among the world population, and that the Bible comes along and presented itself in that worldview. And even the prophecies that we see today in the process of getting ready to be unfolded were given from the perspective of that worldview. That worldview is a Mesopotamian, Babylonian worldview that morphed over time into different cultures, but essentially goes back to Babylon. That is the purpose of this video. I know it's raw. I know it's not very professional, but it is what it is. And I thank you for your time. Thank you.